Good evening. I'm Adrien Sala, and you're listening to WikiSleep YouTube. If you're enjoying our channel, but hate the ads, all of our episodes are available ad-free through our WikiSleep app, which you can find easily by clicking the links below or visiting wikisleep.com. The app has more unique sleep support, including meditations, breath work, ambient sounds, white noise, exclusive episodes, and so much more. It's available entirely ad-free, and you can download it for free by visiting wikisleep.com. There's a free trial to give it a test drive to see if it's the right fit for you, and then it's only an investment of $1.50 a week for better sleep. It's a quick, simple, and inexpensive way to invest in your sleep hygiene and sleep health. As we begin, I recommend taking a moment to get comfortable. Then take a few long, deep breaths and settle in for this calm, interesting, but quiet story. And one last note, no need to smash that like button. You can simply, gently, sleepily click it and subscribe. And don't forget while you're doing that to add notifications as well so you never miss an episode. Thank you, and I wish you a happy, restful sleep in whatever way works best for you. Good evening. I'm Adrien Sala, and tonight I'll be reading to you about Michelangelo, an Italian sculptor, painter, architect, and poet of the High Renaissance. Born in the Republic of Florence, Michelangelo exerted an unparalleled influence on the development of Western art through pieces such as the Statue of David and the ceiling at the Sistine Chapel. His artistic versatility was of such a high order that during his lifetime he was known as Il Divino, or the Divine One. As we begin, take a moment to settle in, and when you're feeling comfortable and ready, take a few long, deep breaths. Close your eyes and sink into the calmness and quiet as we explore the life of one of the most influential artists in history. And remember, if you do start to fall asleep, embrace it. Simply breathe it in and let yourself drift off. Michelangelo da Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni, known simply as Michelangelo, was an Italian sculptor, painter, architect, and poet of the High Renaissance. Born in the Republic of Florence, he exerted an unparalleled influence on the development of Western art. His artistic versatility was of such a high order that he is often considered a contender for the title of the archetypical Renaissance artist, along with his rival and elder contemporary, Leonardo da Vinci. For several generations, his family had been small-scale bankers in Florence. But the bank failed, and his father, Ludovico, briefly took a government post in Caprese, where Michelangelo was born on March 6th, 1475. Known today as Caprese Michelangelo, it is a small town near Arezzo, Tuscany. At the time of Michelangelo's birth, his father was the town's judicial administrator. His family, the Buonarrotis, claimed to descend from the Countess Matilda of Canossa, a claim that remains unproven, but which Michelangelo believed. Several months after his birth, the family returned to Florence, where he was raised. There, his mother had a prolonged illness and sadly died in 1481 when Michelangelo was just 6 years old. He then lived with a nanny and her husband, a stonecutter, in the town of Settignano, where his father owned a marble quarry and a small farm. There, he gained his love for marble. He is quoted as saying, "If there is some good in me, it is because I was born in the subtle atmosphere of your country of Arezzo. Along with the milk of my nurse, I received the knack of handling a chisel and hammer, with which I make my figures." As a boy, Michelangelo was eventually sent to Florence to study grammar under the humanist Francesco da Urbino. However, he showed no interest in his schooling, preferring instead to copy paintings from churches and seek the company of other painters. The city of Florence was at the time Italy's greatest center of the arts and learning. Art was sponsored by the Signoria, the town council, as well as the merchant guilds and wealthy patrons such as the Medici and their banking associates. The Renaissance, a renewal of classical scholarship in the arts, had its first flowering in Florence. During Michelangelo's childhood, a team of painters had been called from Florence to the Vatican to decorate the walls of the Sistine Chapel. Among them was Domenico Ghirlandaio, a master in fresco painting, perspective, figure drawing, and portraiture, who had the largest workshop in Florence. In 1488, at age 13, Michelangelo was apprenticed to Ghirlandaio. The next year, his father persuaded Ghirlandaio to pay Michelangelo as an artist, which was rare for someone so young. Then, in 1489, when Lorenzo de' Medici, de facto ruler of Florence, asked Ghirlandaio for his two best pupils, he sent Michelangelo and Francesco Granacci. From 1490 to 1492, Michelangelo attended the Platonic Academy, a humanist academy founded by the Medici. There, his work and outlook were influenced by many of the prominent philosophers and writers of the day. During this time, Michelangelo sculpted the reliefs Madonna of the Steps and Battle of the Centaurs, the latter commissioned by Lorenzo de' Medici. He also worked for a time with the sculptor Bertoldo di Giovanni. Lorenzo de' Medici's death on April 8, 1492, brought a reversal of Michelangelo's fortunes. He left the security of the Medici court and returned to his father's house. In the following months, he carved a polychrome wooden crucifix as a gift to the prior of the Florentine church of Santo Spirito, who had allowed him to do some anatomical studies of the corpses from the church's hospital. This was the first of several instances during his career that Michelangelo studied anatomy by dissecting cadavers. On January 20th, 1494, after heavy snowfalls, Lorenzo's heir, Piero de' Medici, commissioned a snow statue, and Michelangelo again entered the court of the Medici. However, in the same year, the Medici were expelled from Florence as a result of the rise of Savonarola. Michelangelo left the city before the end of the political upheaval, moving to Venice and then to Bologna. In Bologna, he was commissioned to carve several of the last small figures for the completion of the shrine of Saint Dominic in the church dedicated to that saint. At this time, he studied the robust reliefs carved by Quercia around the main portal of the Basilica of St. Petronius, including the panel of the Creation of Eve, the composition of which was to reappear on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Toward the end of 1495, the political situation in Florence was calmer. The city, previously under threat from the French, was no longer in danger as Charles VIII had suffered defeats. Michelangelo returned to Florence, but received no commissions from the new city government under Savonarola. Instead, he returned to the employment of the Medici. During the half year he spent in Florence, he worked on two small statues, a child, St. John the Baptist, and a sleeping Cupid. According to contemporary historian Condivi, Lorenzo de' Medici, for whom Michelangelo had sculpted St. John the Baptist, asked that Michelangelo fix it so that it looked as if it had been buried so he could send it to Rome, pass it off as an ancient work, and sell it much better. But both Lorenzo and Michelangelo were unwittingly cheated out of the real value of the piece by a middleman. Cardinal Raphael Riario, to whom Lorenzo had sold it, discovered that it was a fraud, but was so impressed by the quality of the sculpture that he invited the artist to Rome. This apparent success in selling his sculpture abroad, as well as the conservative Florentine situation, may have encouraged Michelangelo to accept the invitation. He arrived in Rome on June 25th, 1496, at the age of 21. Shortly after, on July 4th, he began work on a commission for Cardinal Riario an over life-size statue of the Roman wine god Bacchus. Upon completion, the work was rejected by the cardinal and subsequently entered the private collection of the banker Jacopo Galli for his garden. In November 1497, the French ambassador to the Holy See commissioned him to carve a Pietà, a sculpture showing the Virgin Mary grieving over the body of Jesus. The subject, which is not part of the biblical narrative of the crucifixion, was common in religious sculpture of medieval Northern Europe and would have been very familiar to the cardinals. The contract was agreed upon in August of the following year, and Michelangelo was 24 at the time of its completion. It was soon to be regarded as one of the world's great masterpieces of sculpture, a revelation of all the potentialities and force of the art of sculpture. Contemporary opinion was summarized by Vasari, who said, "It is certainly a miracle that a formless block of stone could ever have been reduced to a perfection that nature is scarcely able to create in the flesh." It is now located in St. Peter's Basilica. In 1499, Michelangelo returned to Florence. There, he was asked by the consuls of the Guild of Wool to complete an unfinished project begun 40 years earlier by Agostino de Duccio, a colossal statue of Carrara marble portraying David as a symbol of Florentine freedom to be placed on the gable of Florence Cathedral. Michelangelo completed his most famous work, the statue of David, in 1504. The masterwork definitively established his prominence as a sculptor of extraordinary technical skill and strength of symbolic imagination. A team of consultants, including Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, Filippino Lippi, Pietro Perugino, Lorenzo de Credi, Andrea della Robbia, Cosimo Rosselli, Michelangelo's dear friend Francesco Granacci, and several more, was called together to decide upon its placement. Ultimately, the Piazza della Signoria, in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, was chosen. It now stands in the Accademia, while a replica occupies its place in the square. With the completion of the David came more commissions. In 1505, he was invited back to Rome by the newly elected Pope Julius II and commissioned to build the Pope's tomb, which was to include 40 statues and be finished in 5 years. But, under the patronage of the Pope, Michelangelo experienced constant interruptions to his work on the tomb in order to accomplish numerous other tasks. Although he worked on the tomb for 40 years, it was never finished to his satisfaction. It is located in the Church of San Pietro in Vincellini in Rome, and is most famous for the central figure of Moses, completed in 1516. Of the other statues intended for the tomb, two, known as the rebellious slave and the dying slave, are now in the Louvre. During the same period, Michelangelo painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which took around 4 years to complete. According to Condevi's account, Bramante, who was working on the building of St. Peter's Basilica, resented Michelangelo's commission for the Pope's tomb and convinced the Pope to commission him in a medium with which he was unfamiliar, in order that he might fail at the task. Michelangelo was originally commissioned to paint the 12 apostles on the triangular pendatives that support the ceiling, and to cover the central part of the ceiling with ornament. But he persuaded Pope Julius to give him a free hand and propose a different and more complex scheme. Representing the creation, the fall of man, the promise of salvation through the prophets, and the genealogy of Christ. The composition stretches over 500 square meters of ceiling and contains over 300 figures. At its center are 9 episodes from the book of Genesis, divided into 3 groups. God's creation of the earth, God's creation of humankind and their fall from God's grace, and lastly, the state of humanity as represented by Noah and his family. On the pendatives supporting the ceiling are painted 12 men and women who prophesied the coming of Jesus, 7 prophets of Israel, and 5 Sibyls, prophetic women of the classical world. Among the most famous paintings on the ceiling are the creation of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, the Deluge, the prophet Jeremiah, and the Comian Sibyl. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling is considered one of the most important works of art in human history. In 1513, Pope Julius died and was succeeded by Pope Leo, the second son of Lorenzo de' Medici. From 1513 to 1516, Pope Leo was on good terms with Pope Julius's surviving relatives, so encouraged Michelangelo to continue work on Julius's tomb. But the families became enemies again in 1516, when Pope Leo tried to seize the Duchy of Urbino from Julius's nephew. Pope Leo then had Michelangelo stop working on the tomb and commissioned him to reconstruct the facade of the Basilica of San Lorenzo in Florence to adorn it with sculptures. He spent 3 years creating drawings and models for the facade, as well as attempting to open a new marble quarry, specifically for the project. But in 1520, the work was abruptly cancelled by his financially strapped patrons before any real progress had been made. The basilica lacks a facade to this day. In 1520, the Medici came back to Michelangelo with another grand proposal, this time for a family funerary chapel in the Basilica of San Lorenzo. For posterity, this project, occupying the artist for much of the 1520s and 1530s, was more fully realized. Michelangelo used his own discretion to create the composition of the Medici Chapel, which houses the large tombs of the two younger members of the Medici family, Giuliano, Duke of Nemours, and Lorenzo, his nephew. It also serves to commemorate their famous predecessors, Lorenzo the Magnificent and his brother, Giuliano, who were buried nearby. The tombs display statues of the two Medici and allegorical figures representing night and day and dusk and dawn. The chapel also contains Michelangelo's Medici Madonna. Pope Leo died in 1521 and was succeeded briefly by the austere Adrien VI, and then by his cousin Guido Medici as Pope Clement VII. In 1524, Michelangelo received an architectural commission from the Medici Pope for the Laurentian Library in San Lorenzo's church. However, in 1527, Florentine citizens, encouraged by the sack of Rome, threw out the Medici and restored the Republic. A siege of the city ensued, and Michelangelo went to the aid of his beloved Florence by working on the city's fortifications from 1528 to 1529. The city fell in 1530, and the Medici were restored to power. As a result, Michelangelo fell out of favor with young Alessandro Medici, who had been installed as the first Duke of Florence. Fearing for his life, he fled to Rome, leaving assistants to complete the Medici Chapel and the Laurentian Library. Despite Michelangelo's support of the Republic and resistance to the Medici rule, he was welcomed by Pope Clement, who reinstated an allowance that he had previously granted the artist and made a new contract with him over the tomb of Pope Julius. In Rome, Michelangelo lived near the church of Santa Maria de Loreto. It was at this time that he met the poet Vittoria Colonna, who was to become one of his closest friends until her death in 1547. Shortly before his death in 1534, Pope Clement commissioned Michelangelo to paint a fresco of the Last Judgment on the altar wall of the Sistine Chapel. His successor, Pope Paul III, was instrumental in seeing that Michelangelo began and completed the project, which he labored on from 1534 to 1541. For the fresco, Michelangelo ignored the usual artistic conventions in portraying Jesus and instead showed him as a massive, muscular figure, youthful, beardless, and naked. He is surrounded by saints, among whom Saint Bartholomew holds a drooping flayed skin bearing the likeness of Michelangelo. In the image, the dead rise from their graves to be consigned either to heaven or to hell. Once completed, the depiction of Christ and the Virgin Mary naked was considered sacrilegious. Cardinal Carafa and Monsignor Cermini campaigned to have the fresco removed or censored, but the Pope resisted. At the Council of Trent, shortly before Michelangelo's death, it was decided to obscure the genitals, and an apprentice of Michelangelo was commissioned to make the alterations. An uncensored copy of the original is in the Capodimonte Museum of Naples. Michelangelo worked on a number of architectural projects during his lifetime as well. They included a design for the Capitoline Hill with its trapezoid piazza displaying the ancient bronze statue of Marcus Aurelius. He designed the upper floor of the Palazzo Farnese and the interior of the Church of Santa Maria, in which he transformed the vaulted interior of an ancient Roman bathhouse. Other architectural works include San Giovanni dei Fiorentini, the Sforza Chapel in the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore in the Porta Pia. While still working on the Last Judgment, he received yet another commission from the Vatican. This was for the painting of two large frescoes in the Cappella Paolina, depicting significant events in the lives of the two most important saints of Rome: the conversion of St. Paul and the crucifixion of St. Peter. They were completed in 1550. In 1546, Michelangelo was appointed architect of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The process of replacing the Constantinian Basilica of the 4th century had been underway for 50 years, and in 1506, foundations had been laid to the plans of Bramante. Successive architects had worked on it, but little progress had been made, and Michelangelo was persuaded to take it over. He returned to the concepts of Bramante and developed his ideas for a centrally planned church, strengthening the structure both physically and visually. The dome of Michelangelo's basilica has been called the greatest creation of the Renaissance. Michelangelo was a devout Catholic whose faith deepened toward the end of his life. His poetry includes the following lines from what is known as Poem 285, written in 1554. Neither painting nor sculpture will be any longer to calm my soul, now turned toward that divine love that opened his arms on the cross to take us in. He was self-disciplined in his personal life, and once told his apprentice, Condivi, "However rich I have been, I have always lived like a poor man." Condivi said that he was indifferent to food and drink, eating more out of necessity than of pleasure, and that he often slept in his clothes and boots. His biographer, Paolo Giovio, says, his nature was so rough and uncouth that his domestic habits were incredibly squalid, and deprived posterity of any pupils who might have followed him. This, however, may not have affected him, as he was by nature a solitary and melancholy person, a man who withdrew himself from the company of others. It is impossible to know for certain whether Michelangelo had physical relationships, but speculation about his sexuality is rooted in his poetry. He wrote over 300 sonnets and madrigals. The longest sequence, displaying deep romantic feeling, was written to Tommaso de Cavalieri, who was 23 years old when Michelangelo met him at the age of 57. These make up the first large sequence of poems in any modern tongue addressed by one man to another, and they predate by 50 years Shakespeare's sonnets to the fair youth. He wrote to Cavalieri, I feel as lit by fire a cold countenance that burns me from afar and keeps itself ice chill. A strength I feel two shapely arms to fill, which without motion moves my every balance. Cavalieri replied, I swear to return your love. Never have I loved a man more than I love you. Never have I wished for a friendship more than I wish for yours. Cavalieri remained devoted to Michelangelo until his death. Late in life, Michelangelo also nurtured a great platonic love for the poet and noble widow, Vittoria Colonna, who he met in Rome in 1536 or 1538, and who was in her late 40s at the time. They wrote sonnets for each other and were in regular contact until she died. These sonnets mostly deal with the spiritual issues that occupied them. Condivi recalls Michelangelo saying that his sole regret in life was that he did not kiss the widow's face in the same manner that he had kissed her hand. In a letter from late 1542, Michelangelo blamed the tensions between Pope Julius II and himself on the envy of Bramante and Raphael, saying of the latter, all he had in art, he got from me. According to Gianpaolo Lomazzo, Michelangelo and Raphael met once, when the former was alone and the latter was accompanied by several others. Michelangelo commented that he thought he had encountered the chief of police with such an assemblage, and Raphael replied that he thought he had met an executioner, as they are wont to walk alone. In his old age, Michelangelo created a number of pietas in which he apparently reflects upon mortality. They are heralded by the Victory, perhaps created for the tomb of Pope Julius II, but left unfinished. In this group, the youthful victor overcomes an older hooded figure with the features of Michelangelo. The Pieta Vittoria Colonna is a chalk drawing of a type described as presentation drawings, as they might be given as a gift by an artist and were not necessarily studies toward a painted work. In this image, Mary's upraised arms and upraised hands are indicative of her prophetic role. In the Florentine Pieta, Michelangelo again depicts himself, this time as the aged Nicodemus, lowering the body of Jesus from the cross into the arms of Mary, his mother, and Mary Magdalene. However, Michelangelo smashed the left arm and leg of the figure of Jesus, perhaps in frustration or rage. A pupil repaired the arm and drilled a hole in which to fix a replacement leg, which was not subsequently attached. The last sculpture that Michelangelo worked on, the Rondinini Pieta, could never be completed because he carved it away until there was insufficient stone. As it remains, the sculpture has an eerie, abstract quality. Michelangelo, with Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael, is considered one of the three giants of the Florentine High Renaissance. Although their names are often cited together, Michelangelo was younger by Leonardo by 23 years and older than Raphael by 8. Because of his reclusive nature, he had little to do with either artist and outlived them both by more than 40 years. In 1546, at the age of 88, 3 weeks before his 89th birthday, Michelangelo died in Rome. His body was taken from Rome and interred in the Basilica of Santa Croce, fulfilling the artist's last request to be buried in his beloved Florence.